Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. After Japan's Fukushima disaster in 2011, much of the world turned away from nuclear power. Across Europe, reactors were shut down while investment poured into renewables and cheap natural gas. But Russia's war on Ukraine exposed the risks of that shift. It left many nations that abandoned nuclear power with an energy shortfall. However, Turkey took a different path. It pressed ahead with its first nuclear plant, a cornerstone of its 2053 energy vision to meet rising demand, secure supplies, and cut emissions. At the heart of that vision is the Akkuyu Nuclear Power Plant, a massive Russian-built project on Turkey's southern coast. Energy Minister Alparslan Bayraktar says the first reactor will go online in 2026. During President Erdogan's recent visit to Washington, Ankara also signed a new cooperation deal with the U.S. on nuclear technology. And with plans already underway for a second plant, firms from across Asia are lining up to bid, signaling that Turkey's nuclear ambitions are only just beginning. For more, joining me now from Mersin is Azime Tedli. She's an associate professor at Mersin University. From Monterey, California, Brenda Schaffer, a research professor at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. And from Berlin, Wilson Center Global Fellow Thomas O'Donnell. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining me. I mean, nuclear has been on the agenda a lot this year, but a different type of nuclear, the one that goes boom. We're going to talk about the one that lights up light bulbs today. Azima, I want to begin with you. I mean, we were in a period where a lot of countries went towards shutting down their nuclear reactors. During that period, Turkey moved to open its first nuclear reactor, Akkuyu Nuclear Power Plant. Was that the right decision?
This scene is very complicated. Of course, there are some countries are now phasing out from nuclear, like Germany. But there are more than countries looking for to be a member of the nuclear energy league, like Turkey, and we can see other. We have to mention others. More than 60 countries, and it's very important to solving energy dependency issues. And nowadays, the world is on the way to energy transition process. And in this condition, every country is looking forward to getting balance between renewables and other kinds of sustainable, stable, and firm energy resources. Which, in terms of this condition, of course, Turkey, one of a growing country, and the Turkey's energy demand is increasing day by day, and looking for opportunity to diversify its energy mix. In our energy mix, there is no room for nuclear, and it's important to be sure. Secure energy future, and of course it's related with the Turkey's target to net zero emission. There is two different dimensions related with these topics. One dimension is related with energy security, but of course there is other dimension related with geopolitical risk. Now I'm just only mentioning about energy security perspective. In this condition, Turkey is very dependent on important fossil fuels, and of course, looking for opportunity changing this condition, especially after a big geopolitical crisis like Arab Springs, like Ukrainian crisis. We realized that getting the independence of energy is more important to creating a reliable future.
Brenda, I mean, we just went through a period where a lot of countries abandoned their nuclear reactors, shut them down. But obviously, this growing demand for electricity, electric vehicles, AI, sucking a lot of energy, a lot more than, or at least projected a lot more than what we have right now. Is nuclear energy back in fashion? I mean, not just from a Turkish perspective, just globally, is nuclear energy back in fashion?
I think to evaluate that, we have to understand why there was a decline in nuclear energy. So most people think it's because of security reasons, but the real reason was because of cost. As nuclear energy became safer, it became more expensive, and essentially it priced itself out of the market. And in places where permitting is long, legal challenges are long, such as in the United States, basically those prices became bigger, merely not necessarily because of the technology, but because of the political risk and the time. So the price issues are still there. Still, nuclear energy is one of the most expensive ways to produce electricity. And in private markets, it's difficult to sustain the capital investment with all the political risk because of permitting. But at the same time, I think markets that have more government participation in the energy sector, I think it is wise that they actually give government support, or at least for the permitting process for nuclear, and have that as part of their fuel mixes. I think something that shows how, in a sense, how maybe unauthentic, but many of the climate policies is the fact that most of the climate organizations, countries that are pushing it, such as energy transition, such as Germany, are actually anti-nuclear, and it kind of makes no sense. If you want to be low carbon, carbon free, of course, the only real source of energy that can deliver massive amounts of energy is nuclear energy. But still, Germany and most of the environmental organizations are anti-nuclear despite its low carbon emissions.
Mhm. Tom, I mean, during the Biden era, there was this big push towards green energy, and everyone had their zero emission commitments. But with Trump back in power, that kind of got forgotten. Trump was actually even pushing for coal power. I mean, when you look at the mix of energies, whether it's renewables, nuclear, natural gas, coal, or fossil fuels, do the fossil fuels, the coal, the oil, do they still have a place, or does that definitely need to be phased out, especially for countries like Turkey, but also countries like the United States or EU member states, and countries like China too, actually?
Yes, well, this sounds like the introduction to a class that's going to take an hour, but I won't do that. Thank you for having me today. The reality is, on the one hand, somebody can say renewables are fastest expanding. Of course, they started from a small percentage, so this percentage increase is rather large, especially in China. But on the other hand, I can tell you every single source of energy that China uses, including coal, is increasing at fantastic levels, and they use more coal than most of the rest of the developed and half the undeveloped world. So one part of the story is a tremendous growth in demand for energy. A lot of the plans for renewable energy, once people factored in under the influence of the green politics, it was a bit of a panacea. That wind and solar, they imagined it taking care of this much. Then they imagined, oh, well, we got to take care of another part. We'll have energy efficiency. We'll increase energy efficiency. And besides, it's a post-industrial society. We'll all use less energy. The fact is, the renewables, I'm sitting here in Germany, as you mentioned, and it's been 5 or 6 years. It was the 8th monitoring report, independent monitoring report that the Bundestag has conducted. The experts came to the conclusion they cannot, on the territory of Germany, produce enough renewables for a modern industrialized country. They have to somehow import it. So as the panacea solution to global warming and to fueling the future, especially when you consider AI, and if people really seriously want to make electric cars, you've got to fuel them instead of using oil. Oil is the #1 source of all energy in the world right now. That's quite a burden. I think that it's all renewables are going to play a place, and you can put a positive or negative spin on that. But the Trump administration is actually, a lot of what it's doing is recognizing reality that you can't. There's a limit to what you can do with renewables, and we could talk about the details. And so, natural gas is going to have a long future. And really, if you don't want to produce carbon in your exhaust, then you have to go to nuclear. And nuclear is going to take If the United States seriously ramps it up and gets efficient at it, it's going to take up to 15 years. The Russians and Chinese and the Koreans, to some extent, are already efficient at doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that definitely seems to be the problem with nuclear, is the turnaround from investment to being able to reap the benefits and the output. But Azima, during the Turkish president's trip to the United States, he met with Trump. Aside from the multilateral meetings, he had a bilateral meeting. And during that bilateral meeting, it seemed that Trump was touting and proposing modular reactors to President Erdogan. Now, obviously, Turkey wants to move forward with nuclear energy. Do you think modular reactors are a good solution for Turkey, especially cooperating with the United States on that issue, or should it continue with nuclear power plant projects?
Actually, in my opinion, my answer is yes, and in both meanings. I mean, is a small modular reactor is could fit well with Turkey's geography and the regional energy needs. And of course, in this geopolitical condition, Turkey needs the Western governments or countries to get investment, Turkey's future energy security. We are looking for new vendors to building a new nuclear capacity. You know, Turkey has a very ambitious nuclear policy for reach its 2053 targets. And it's related with this policy. We are waiting for our electricity demands get tripled till 2050. In this condition, Turkey looking for building a conventional, extra building and conventional nuclear plants. And of course, we are looking for small modular reactors. And they are very fast model. They are very, they are easy to invest this modular nuclear plants, but of course there are still some obstacles for investing these nuclear plants. Still there are some financial issues. It's not a good for commercial way. And still we have problems related with the changing the regulation about small modular reactors. But we are looking for future, and it's very important to make a balance between partnerships on nuclear power plants. Now we are depending only on Russia, and Russia is looking for a new investment on Turkish markets. It's not a good idea to put all eggs same baskets. If we are talking about energy, it's very dangerous, and if we are talking about nuclear, it gets more dangerous. And you know, Turkey and US have a good partnerships, and sometimes we had some problems related with geopolitical issues. But nowadays, especially after Trump era, the relation turns a normalization, and the energy pillar is the one of important part of this normalization process, and it's very good opportunity to get support from US or maybe other Western countries like South Korea or Japan. It's very good for Turkey to balancing Russian leverage on Turkey energy markets.
Brenda, I didn't want to get too much into geopolitics, but I guess it was inevitable talking about energy and not talking about geopolitics. So let's move forward on that issue. When Turkey is making future decisions, whether it be nuclear power plant or modular, how much do you think the geopolitics will be part of President Erdogan's considerations moving forward? I mean, we always hear about carrot and the stick. Is buying modular reactors kind of a carrot that Erdogan has for the United States, or who he decides he wants to work with on the next nuclear power plant? We've heard about Japan, South Korea. It seems like the Chinese are interested. Will geopolitical considerations be very important in making that decision?
First, I want to address your question about phasing out of fossil fuels, because this question seems to assume that we have some option of phasing out fossil fuels. and as if that's a global trend. But the reality is fossil fuels supply 87% of global energy. I repeat that, 87%. From the 1970s, we've invested literally trillions of dollars in supporting and subsidizing a non-fossil fuel energy. And despite that, it's more or less at the same place that it started in the early 70s. So I think it's very important that all analysts, media, the sort of idea that we're in this energy transition away from fossil fuels. I think it's really important to debunk that. Specifically about your question about geopolitics, sure. I mean, you can't separate energy security from national security. And it's good. It's essential. It's obvious that geopolitics will play a role in energy security. And I think I often, when I'm asked what's an example of a very good energy strategy, I give the example of Türkiye, because what for many reasons, but one of the main reasons is its principle of diversification, whether it's multiple, natural gas suppliers, whether it's pipeline gas plus LNG, whether it's energy storage, which you've invested in very significantly in Turkey. And so, of course, I think in the issue of nuclear, it's extremely important to have diversified suppliers of the nuclear reactors, diversified fuel supply for the reactors. And at the same time, you can, through diversification, meaning not just relying on Russia, you can also gain interest of additional partners, whether it's United States, South Korea, or Japan. And I think specifically also the fact that Turkey has concluded a number of, several large and long-term LNG supply contracts with American companies. This was a very wise strategy that also brings additional supporters of Turkey in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Tom, since you're in Germany, I want to pose this question to you. Obviously, the Nord Stream pipeline, the massive explosion that took it offline, who did it, how it happened? I'm not concerned about that. We'll leave that up to the intelligence agencies and the courts to decide. But more importantly, its impact on the energy markets, its impact on the German economy, and the outlook towards maybe alternative means of energy away from Russian gas, and nuclear being one of them. How big has its impact been now that we've been able to look back a couple of years on that incident?
Well, I think Germany should provide a very good negative example that Turkey should avoid. If I continue on the path of what Brenda has just said, diversification. So it's a long story going back to when we had President Carter and then later President Reagan. The Europeans, the Germans in particular, really went to marry themselves with the Russians for natural gas, to have their economy very dependent on this. There were sanctions against it. There was a big fight back then in the 80s. But in any case, they became very dependent, 50% dependent, as we've talked about before on your show during these crises. And Putin precisely used it for what the Americans over something like administrations, Democrat, Republican, had all warned them: if you're that dependent on the Russians, they have a lever. And Putin cut off the gas before the war began, just before the war began in Ukraine. This was the energy front of his war. He had hoped to kneecap the Europeans energy-wise, to make it impossible for them to express solidarity with the Ukrainians. He also thought he was going to conquer Ukraine quick, cut off all the gas to Europe, and the Europeans would say, okay, well, Ukraine's yours, or something like that. But it didn't happen that way. And they were saved by what? They were saved by LNG and gas coming from many other places, especially American LNG coming. And also they were just lucky that China was in the course of getting over Corona and their economy wasn't taking off. A lot of the natural gas they had contracted for, LNG, they were willing to resell for a high price to Europe. And the Qataris came through, and the Norwegians, the Algerians. So they got through it, but they're in a terrible situation here. They're in a process that they themselves call deindustrialization. They have many different problems of investment over time and choices of what they're working on. But the energy hit, that's sort of like it's panning out perhaps to be the stone that breaks the camel's back. They need very badly LNG from Qatar and from the United States, and that's what they have to do. The renewables are not panning out in the way they thought. Just one point on this, which is very fundamental. If you want to base your system on wind and solar that are variable, every day it can come or it cannot come, you need something to back it up. Everybody said there'd be batteries. Batteries don't work for more than a few hours. It doesn't work. So what they're doing is they're using more and more natural gas. The more windmills they install, the days when they don't run, they need a complete parallel system that's natural gas. Putin saw this, and he knew how vulnerable they were. Now, Turkey is focusing very much on getting natural gas from diversified sources. The Russian sources are coming down. It's up for negotiation this year. The Iranian sources are coming down. They might still take some of that, not to the pleasure of the Americans, certainly. But if they do, they probably use it more at home. But Turkey's starting to acquire this huge amounts of LNG that are coming from Qatar, the United States, and elsewhere, create a hub and resell it to Europe or to the world. And also, it's doing a lot of exploration on its own. So on that front, it's smart. And on the front of having also nuclear down the line, I don't think it's so smart to involve the Russians. This was done in the 2015 or so, the contracts. But that's going to make a big problem for them as time goes on, depending on what happens to Russia in the next few years.
Azima, very quickly, Brenda talked about 87% of global energy coming from fossil fuels, a lot of investment there. And Tom said that, renewables didn't pan out for Germany the way they expected. When you look at Turkey's energy future, renewables, when I drive down the Turkish coast, I see these windmills everywhere. Obviously, hydroelectric plants, there's solar. So it seems like Turkey made an investment in renewables. It's also making that investment in nuclear energy. What's the correct path for Turkey? Does it continue this mix? Does it concentrate on one or the other? Assuming no new technology comes out that would override or make obsolete what we have now.
Well, it's for Turkey, the hybrid system is very suitable for solving energy question. And now you mentioned that Turkey's renewable capacity is growing rapidly. It's very good for Turkey because we have a very huge opportunity for renewables. Wind, solar, and other kinds of renewables. It's very important, and they are sustaining our national energy independence. Yeah? And of course, natural gas is very important part of the Turkish future energy security. Both for Turkey's national energy demand and the other political reason. Turkey is still looking for an energy hub for natural gas. It's not easy, and it gets hard day by day, but still on the table. And the other way, we are dependent on coal for electricity demand. And in this condition, it's not easy Turkey to phase off coal. But of course, solving these problems related with our net zero emission, it takes time, and it affects the Turkey economical condition. But Turkey is looking for to balancing all energy sources, and it's very good solution for Turkey's future. If we look at the last 3 years, actually after Ukrainian crisis, most of European countries affected this energy crisis, but Turkey didn't affect this crisis from directly. And it's related with its balanced energy policy. And I fully agree with my colleagues. Turkey still keep going this policy and more dependent on national resources.
Azima, Brenda, Tom, we are out of time, but thank you for an energetic conversation. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.